a single thing in the last 5 years, I would say it is vaccine Maitri. It's vaccine Maitri because, every September, there's this UN General Assembly. Last September, a bunch of countries actually came to us and said, we'd like an event where we want to tell you what we think about you. Because we are all recipients of your vaccines and vaccine Maitri. And you should hear them. They really, I would say, you cannot be unmoved by what you hear. The foreign minister of Jamaica, who's a lady, she actually says, I have vaccine Maitri inside me. That is the kind of impact today that we are making in the world. But one part of it is, how we govern at home, how we look after our people. Yes, there's the part how we contribute to the world. But every country, because it's a very competitive world, every country is also tested. We all face security challenges. We come under public pressures. So I give you 2 more examples why the world today thinks of us differently. You saw that during the Ukraine conflict, we came under a lot of pressure from some Western countries that while they wanted to keep their freedom to buy energy from Russia on terms and pace which they wanted us really to sacrifice the interests of the Indian consumer. No, we stood firm. We stood firm publicly. And I would say this to you, across Asia, across Africa, across Latin America, a lot of other foreign ministers, sometimes even prime ministers and presidents, basically told me or told Prime Minister, saying, look, we admire what you did. Many of us had that feeling. Not all of us had the ability or the courage to say it. That is also something today the world takes. I'll give you a different example. Some years ago, we revived a platform called the Quad. It's a group of India, USA, Japan, and Australia, because we felt we had a lot of common interests. Now, there was a lot of pressure, you can guess from where, not to do it. Now, 10 years ago, in 2007, actually we had tried Quad the first time. There was pressure, and the 4 countries gave up on the Quad. This time, we stood firm. So, when you stand firm on tough issues at a global level, the kind of, I would say, the kind of respect that you generate is actually very, very different. But sometimes it can be, you don't have to go out in diplomacy or in a, I would say, in a global arena. It can be right at our border. How a country behaves when its security is threatened, when its people are attacked, that too is a judge of our character. So, if you compare what we did after Mumbai 26/11 with what we did at Uri and Balakot, the world draws a message from it. When you see our soldiers after 2020 deployed in the northern borders, in the Himalayas against China, and you compare today how we are supporting them, sustaining them, making sure they have the capabilities. The world remembers how were these people in 1962, how are they today. This is also something, the willingness to stand up to coercion, stand up to pressure, stand up when your national security and your core interests are at stake. In recent years, we have also had, a number of issues on which India has been a source of ideas, sometimes a suggester of initiatives. So you can see that in terms of the International Solar Alliance today, which has done more than anything else to propagate solar energy. You see this right now in something called the International Millets Year. That too is something which is very important for food security. When it comes to disasters, because in this, as climate change increases, there'll be more and more disasters. India was the first country to propose a global coalition for disaster resilience. So we are no longer today the receiver of ideas, or the receiver of assistance, or the receiver of, what other people give to the rest of the world. We are also today a contributor. We are a giver. We are a provider. We are a responder. That is today the changing image of India. But in the final analysis, what the world thinks about India is determined by two factors. One, the buzz, the energy, what they sense is happening in India. And most of all today, this is visible in the digital domain. The scale of what we have done digitally. When I go around talking to people, saying, we deliver food to 80 crore people. We give money in the bank accounts of 40 crore people. Even the Ujjwala, the gas cylinder, is given to 8 crore people. The number of family members who have benefited from housing provided by government is 13 crores. So these are, for the world, fantastic figures. And the countries with less population marvel at the figures. But there are many countries who say, we have the same problem. I've actually had a president who made me sit for half an hour and made me talk about all of this, because he said, I have the same leakage issue in India, that in my country. So when I explained to him how leakage in India was cut, how those days when, 100 rupees left India, left Delhi, and 15 rupees reached the recipient, how that era is over, it's something which is of enormous interest. The other, of course, is people today see the personality of India. The fact that we today are culturally proud. We are not today trying to be an imitation of other cultures. That whether it is our food, whether it is our speech, whether it is our culture, whether it is our traditions, it is something that we project, for which we demand a rightful place. And that, I can tell you, the rise of a civilization again on the world stage, that is something which the world knows about. So what are the challenges? I would say there are three big challenges. One, to progress further, to build on all this, it's important that we be Atmanirbhar. Atmanirbhar, not that we should be protectionist, not that we should say, oh, everything abroad is bad and everything must be made in India. Atmanirbhar means the key things, the core things, what we should be doing for our people, what we are capable of doing. If you take the defense budget, 10 years ago, we were importing, all sorts of things. Today, you can actually see, as a result of Make in India, that, it could be clothing, it could be weapons, it could be artillery. Once you actually start tapping your own people, your own talent, we look at drones. Today the Indian armed forces are relying on the talent and skill of young Indians really to invent and deploy drones for national security. So how do you actually make a more Atmanirbhar India? Because if we depend on outside imports, it's not just bad for trade. It can be dangerous to national security. That countries can take advantage at moments of crisis. What we saw during COVID, when actually, there was a spike in the demand of PPEs and ventilators and masks. The second is how do we leapfrog? And that is where I think particularly the contribution of Karnataka and Bengaluru is there. How do you deploy new technologies? How do you change the mindset of people? How do you create a different work culture, or a different economic culture? And the third, of course, is the national security challenges. How do we continue to respond decisively to not just, what happens on our borders or terrorism? Because there will also be efforts to sow discord within our society. There will be attempts to undermine our morale. Today, in a globalized world, there are different ways by which ill-wishers can influence events. So it is something that we need to be very, very conscious of. So the point which my message to all of you today is, there is a world out there that is very different. It is a world which is looking at us with much greater, I would say, sense of partnership, much greater interest of cooperation. But we also need to look at the world differently. The world today is much more of a global workplace than it has been. Every country today, every developed country today is actually trying to interest us in how do we get our skills and talents. In recent months, we have done agreements with a number of European countries, Germany, Austria, France, Portugal. The second, the world will be a tech place, increasingly a tech place. There's nothing today in manufacturing which is happening without some kind of embedded technology in it. The world will be much more a services-driven economy. The world will be a stronger supply chain. Supply chains, we have a chance to participate in it. And the world will be a place where there will be an interest in collectively shaping our future. So I actually would impress on you the point which Tejasvi ji made. Foreign policy is not something abroad. If we did not handle the Ukraine issue right, each one of you would be paying so much rupees more for the petrol that you fill in every day. If we did not get our relationships right, we had to find even new sources of cooking oil, because Ukraine was one of the largest suppliers of sunflower oil to India. So we had to go around the rest of the world finding some other source, and we found a lot of it in Latin America. If we do not, for example, attract global manufacturing to India, that lovely instrument on which all of us spend so much screen time, that will be much more expensive, and it will not be something which would be made in India and which would in fact incorporate features which reflect its consumer base. So the idea today that there's a world there and there is we in India, that era is over. I think the young people of this world realize it. So I am standing before you here today to share with you that sense that the world today is much more India ready, and that is what we actually are trying to use the G20 to reinforce. Because the G20, G20 has 200 meetings. The G20 has the most powerful influencers in the world. I mean, if for every meeting, if you put a few hundred people coming,